I'm Roger Benedict, Principal Viola of the Sydney Symphony Orchestra, and in this masterclass, I'll be exploring one of the excerpts that has to be prepared for the YouTube Symphony Orchestra audition. It's from Don Juan by Richard Strauss. This piece is incredibly virtuosic, and that's the reason it's always set for orchestral auditions. Make sure you do plenty of research, listen to several recordings, and if possible, get a copy of the full score to see how the viola part fits into the whole. It's this vital sense of context that you have to convey in an audition. So even though you're playing on your own, the listener should sense from your playing that you understand exactly what your instrument's role is in the excerpt. I think a good tempo for this excerpt would be about minim or half note equals 84. But remember, it's better to play a little bit under the tempo, but under control, than at top speed and out of control. I'll go through the piece in sections. So the first thing is to make sure it's incredibly rhythmic, that there's a big difference between semiquavers, triplets, the dotted rhythm in the second bar. Of course, the ironic thing is, when you play this piece in the orchestra, the first bar is a bit like this, because there's no time to play the notes. Often the conductor's still walking on stage when he starts the piece. But for the audition, all the notes have to be there. So make sure every note is as clear as a bell. Every single semiquaver, it's got lots of clarity. For the run at the end of the first line, this one, I think it helps if you practice it building up backwards. So, like this. The idea is then, if you're working always on the arrival note, then you'll always get there. But if you're always starting from the beginning, you don't always know where you're arriving. So to practice them by building up is a good idea. The next passage in triplets helps if you hold your left-hand fingers down wherever possible. So I've got my first finger already on this fifth. Practicing it in rhythms will really help. So accent string crossings. So this. The notes that are string crossings. Accenting shifts will also help. Then practice it in small bursts. Until it's really clear. The next note should really be a long crotchet, and then a quaver with an accent before you launch into this accompaniment of this fantastic tune that happens throughout the orchestra. And make sure your pizzicatos are really resonant, each one of them. Yeah, they should sound incredibly big. There's a detail at the end of the third line of the excerpt that I think is worth bearing in mind. The last note of the penultimate bar is Fortissimo, and then only mezzo forte. This tends to get overlooked. And then you've got room for a big crescendo before this. Now this wonderful passage, which we all have to practice so much, it's really difficult, but it's manageable if you practice it really carefully and really methodically, I think. With a fingering at A, I always do shifting on each beat. I think it's easier if you shift on the beats rather than between the beats. You can practice slurred. You can practice slurred in rhythms. You can practice in groups of 2 rather than groups of 3. So instead of you do. Again, it's really good for coordination between left and right. In the end, though, make sure your left hand leads. and by practicing in rhythms in slurs, the left hand gets much more confident about playing these rhythms. And don't forget there are string crossings in the left hand as well as the right. Nearly always, I think it's the left hand that lets us down with string crossings. After A, the next line down, where we have an accent on every single note, it's very easy to cut those minims or half notes short, so make sure they stay really in time. When we listen to auditions, we're listening out for things like this all the time, little flaws in rhythm. Now this is the highest dynamic so far. This is Fortissimo. If you keep playing Fortissimo, you'll run out of steam very easily for the next passage. So what I'd recommend is that for the next passage, where the triplets start, you just come down to maybe a mezzo forte for the crescendo. Now this famous passage, again, you can practice it building up from the end. It's another good way of, I think, securing that last note as much as you can. But I think it helps to practice it by phrasing it from the second note of each group. So, like this. Each one, even when it's fast. Like this, because it helps to build momentum without rushing. And then you can practice it in rhythms as well, like this. But maybe, and also slurred. Again, helps your left-hand string crossings. So on to the next passage. And listen to those accents. Again, they sometimes get forgotten about. So if you can really show those as much as possible, that would be great. Another thing that gets forgotten, I find, at letter B, a lot of people play this. In fact, it's the opposite. The second beat of B is a drop in dynamic. It goes from a fortissimo to only forte or even less. So make sure you don't hit the second beat of B. That's less. At the end of the line, this is pianissimo and very shy. Yes, you can underplay this. Then after this, suddenly it's louder. And you can take a little bit of time over this passage, more expressive. He actually writes to be a bit slower. And it's injecting these little passages with some charm, which will really make you shine in the audition. Like this. Okay, on to the next passage, letter C. So this passage, which is so difficult to control, I'd recommend, first of all, you don't need to play the bottom note. It doesn't make it particularly easier, and I think the focus should be on getting that piano triplet really together, or really rhythmic, rather. Yeah. Helps maybe to shift early, certainly when you're practicing. And if you practice these passages slurred, again, it helps. And then all these passages which intersperse the triplets should be really expressive. It's a big crescendo that goes through this whole passage. It's easy to get just worried about playing the notes without doing the expression. Watch the intonation at the end. It's easy to get sharp, as I just did, so be just very careful there. And then the last passage. That's where you breathe the sigh of relief that you've got to the end. Just make sure that this is incredibly rhythmic. And not just rhythmic, but there's character in the rhythm. Getting to this tremolo. So, that covers Don Juan. Good luck. You have to practice a lot in this excerpt, but it's worth it. It really is. And if you're successful in your audition, then you'll end up playing on this very stage at the Sydney Opera House next March.